Okay, here's a question to start us off. What if the American dream isn't just about, getting rich? What if it's something deeper, something that maybe feels like it's crumbling quietly in towns all over the country?
Hmm. Or maybe, why do so many people feel like strangers almost in their own hometowns? It's a feeling a lot of people recognize, I think.
Exactly. Well, welcome everyone to Book Talk. This is our special series from the Deep Dive where we really get into compelling books that help us understand what's going on beneath the surface. Today, we are digging into Alienated America by Timothy P. Carney. It's an incredibly timely book, really insightful.
It really is. It tackles that huge question. Why do so many Americans feel like the American dream is just dead?
Right. And Carney doesn't just leave it there. He connects that feeling, that sense of loss, to something he calls the dissolution of civil society. It's quite a thesis.
Yeah, and the book takes you on this journey, doesn't it? Through different kinds of American communities, some thriving, some decaying. It's quite stark.
And Timothy Carney, the author, he's a really thoughtful writer. You can tell he digs deep into these big societal issues.
He's the commentary editor at the Washington Examiner, a visiting fellow at AEI. You can tell he's passionate about getting to the heart of what makes American communities tick or what makes them fall apart.
He's not just reporting facts. It feels like he's diagnosing something really pervasive.
Yeah, like a societal illness almost. Affects everyone in different ways.
It's really great to be able to explore books like this with you all. Before we dive right into Alienated America, just a quick reminder, please do hit that subscribe button on our YouTube channel.
Yeah, definitely. You'll find more discussions like this one, more deep dives from our book talk series. We've got some great stuff planned.
You really won't want to miss out.
Mhm.
Okay, let's get started. Part 1, The Disappearing American Dream, a Social Diagnosis. Let's start with the core idea, the book's premise. For a lot of people, the American dream just feels gone, dead.
Right. And Carney really zeroes in on the 2016 election to illustrate this. Think back to Donald Trump's message. The American dream is dead. He didn't just say it was struggling. He said it was dead.
And then promised to bring it back. Bigger and better and stronger than ever before. That was potent stuff.
Incredibly potent. And that core message that the dream was already gone, it landed hard in what Carney calls these social capital deserts.
Places where community ties felt weak, maybe.
Exactly. And it was such a contrast to what he calls the cheery talk from other candidates. They seem to be talking about a different reality altogether.
So the book argues 2016 wasn't just politics as usual. It was like a referendum on the American dream itself.
Yeah, a signal of this deep, widespread feeling. And it wasn't just about the economy, was it? Not just numbers on a page.
No, that's the key point. It went way beyond economic metrics. It wasn't just stagnant wages or job numbers, though those were factors.
It was this profound sense of being abandoned, of breakdown.
Yeah, and Carney paints this picture. You could almost see it. The emptying VFW halls, the boarded up main streets that used to be bustling.
The defunct union halls in these old industrial towns, these aren't just buildings falling apart. They symbolize a fraying social fabric, right?
Absolutely. A loss of connection, maybe even purpose, that statistics just can't fully capture.
And the symptoms of this decay, this deeper problem, they're really disturbing when you look at them.
The book talks about deaths of despair. That phrase is chilling in itself.
It really is. We're talking about this alarming rise, especially among middle-aged white Americans, in deaths from things like drug and alcohol poisoning, suicide, chronic liver disease. The numbers are stark responsible for more than half the rise in mortality in that group between 2000 and 2014. It's a genuine tragedy.
And it speaks volumes about the emotional state, the spiritual state maybe, of these communities.
And there's research backing this up, right? It's not just anecdotal.
No, not at all. The book cites economists like Alan Kruger, whose research found that prime-age men, we're talking 25 to 54, who are out of the labor force, they report notably low levels of emotional well-being, a real lack of meaning in their day-to-day lives.
Wow. And the pain medication statistic.
Yeah, almost half of them taking daily pain medication, mostly prescription. Carney frames it not as laziness, but as an affliction.
An affliction, meaning?
Meaning it's a consequence of being deprived of meaningful things to do, of lacking that context for purpose that strong communities often provide.
So when those community bonds weaken or break, the human cost is just catastrophic. It shows up in these, deaths of despair.
That's a really powerful way to frame it. It paints a much darker picture than just, say, high unemployment figures.
Definitely. So how does this affliction, as Carney calls it, show up in terms of people's engagement with work, with the economy?
Well, it leads straight into another major symptom. People just dropping out of the labor force altogether.
Right. The labor force dropout numbers, those are alarming, too.
They really are. By 2015, think about this. Over 1 in 10 prime working age men, 25 to 54, were neither working nor even looking for work.
1 in 10 compared to what it used to be.
It was only about 3.4% back in 1964. So that's a massive jump. It's not a small dip. It's a fundamental shift.
Wow. And people are digging into why. What are they doing?
Yeah, researchers like Nicholas Eberstadt looked into this. He found that for the men out of the labor force in 2014, 2/3 of them were out for the entire year.
The whole year, not just between jobs.
No, completely detached.
Yeah.
And time use surveys show what they're doing. Mostly watching. TV, DVDs, internet.
How much watching?
An average of 2,000 hours a year. That's almost like a full-time job's worth of screen time.
So it's not like they're pursuing hobbies or retraining or...
No, the data suggests it's not active leisure. It's more like a profound lack of engagement. Carney suggests this might actually be the most important negative economic indicator.
More important than wages or unemployment.
Potentially, yeah. Because it signals something deeper. A whole social class, as he puts it, deprived of meaningful things to do, deprived of those traditional training grounds that work used to provide, like discipline, teamwork, structure.
So it's systemic. It's not just individual choices adding up. It sounds like there's a geography to this, too.
Definitely. The book talks a lot about the geographic segregation of opportunity. America, it's the land of opportunity. It's increasingly becoming a country with pockets. Lands of opportunity alongside lands of hopelessness.
Like two different countries almost existing side by side.
Exactly. You see the elite, the highly educated, the affluent, they're increasingly clustering together in places they can afford, often expensive places like Chevy Chase, Maryland, which the book looks at.
Surrounded by people just like them.
Right. And that leaves behind communities with fewer resources, less education, fewer skills. They become their own kind of homogenous cluster, but often these social capital deserts we mentioned.
And the economic data backs this up.
Starkly. The recovery after the 2009 crisis, mostly concentrated in big metro areas. By mid-2016, places outside those metros still hadn't recovered their pre-crisis employment levels.
So behind.
Yeah, still about 3% lower. And Carney quotes research showing more than half of distressed communities saw net losses in both jobs and businesses since the year 2000. It's not just stagnation, it's decline.
And the human cost. The life expectancy gap you mentioned.
It's grim. A gap of potentially 21 years between the counties with the highest life expectancy and those with the lowest. 66 years versus 87 years.
21 years. That's incredible.
It really underscores Carney's point. You can't understand America today without looking at people in their communities where they live. Geography matters. Part 2. The two villages where the American dream lives and dies. So this geographic divide really sets up the book's comparison of the two villages. Let's start with the first one. Chevy Chase, Maryland. Carney calls it the Hillary's Village model.
Right, and it's incredibly wealthy. Median home cost over $1.5 million.
Wow, and highly educated too, right?
Extremely. Nearly a third of adults there have graduate degrees. And the community structures seem really strong, like 95% two-parent households. They even have a monthly speaker series at the village hall. It sounds very organized, very engaged.
And politically, it's interesting, too. Despite being wealthy, often associated with Republicans, they strongly rejected Trump in the primary.
Yeah, only 16% voted for him there. They preferred Kasich. Which kind of challenges that simple idea that money equals hope, or that wealth automatically aligns you one way politically.
Right. The book pushes back on just saying, oh, it's because they're rich. It suggests there's something else, something deeper going on.
And that something deeper really comes into focus when you look at the other village he profiles, Oostburg, Wisconsin.
Which is totally different, isn't it?
Completely different. Rural, farming community, an outlying suburb of Sheboygan. Definitely not affluent like Chevy Chase. But it has this incredibly strong sense of community, rooted in its Dutch heritage, its 4 Reformed churches. It's palpable, according to Carney.
He has some great anecdotes about Oostburg, doesn't he?
He really does. Like the story about Judy's Place Diner, where everyone knows everyone, and when a waitress needed surgery, people just started preparing and dropping off frozen meals for her automatically.
Wow, that's community in action.
Or the school Christmas concert anecdote. It's overcrowded, standing room only, and people without kids even performing are there because, as Carney quotes someone, Oostburgers consider the kids of Oostburg our kids. That sense of collective ownership.
That's powerful. And politically, Oostburg is also interesting, but in a different way.
Right, Trump won big there in the general election, 80%.
Yeah.
But crucially, in the Republican primary, he only got 15% of the vote.
Almost identical to Chevy Chase.
Exactly, which really throws a wrench into simple explanations. It wasn't just about standard conservative alignment.
And Carney makes the point it's not just about Christian conservatism either, right? Because Trump did well with evangelicals overall in some places.
But he often lost the regular churchgoers to candidates like Ted Cruz in many primaries. His strongest support sometimes came from people who identified as evangelical but didn't actually attend church regularly.
So that points to a different kind of social divide, maybe related to community involvement itself.
Precisely, which leads to the big question the book asks.
Here's where it gets really interesting. What is the secret sauce? What makes places as different as wealthy Chevy Chase and working-class Oostburg both thrive in this community sense?
And the answer Carney lands on is institutions of civil society and social capital.
Okay, let's define those terms. What exactly are institutions of civil society?
They're basically all those groups and relationships that exist between the individual or the family and the big central government. So churches, obviously, but also schools, local clubs, workplaces, PTAs, book clubs, neighborhood associations, you name it.
The stuff that makes up community life and social capital.
That's the wealth that comes from those connections. It's not money in the bank. It's the goodwill, the trust, the fellowship, the mutual support that exists within a group of people. It's the value in relationships.
Carney shares a personal story about this, doesn't he? After his baby was ill.
Yeah, it's very moving. He talks about how this dense and broad network of friends, people from his church, his pool, his kids' school, his work just materialized, offering food, help with carpool, sitting with his other kids. It was a real, tangible, short-term safety net.
Built on those connections.
Exactly. And he contrasts that with J.D. Vance's experience, realizing in law school how central these kinds of personal connections, often built through civil society, were to elite success connections he just didn't have growing up in a more alienated place.
So the core insight really seems to be the American dream, or maybe just a good life, isn't just about your economic zip code. It's about how you live, communally. Are you plugged into these networks?
Precisely. It's about those deep, often invisible networks that provide support, sure, but also purpose, meaning.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, these strong communities, places like Chevy Chase and Oostburg, they provide purpose. They encourage industriousness.
Right, because virtue isn't just an idea, it's a habit, right? It often requires doing things, usually with other people.
And they provide a supportive environment where people get kind of roped into meaningful activities.
Yeah, exactly. And without those thick webs of civil society, people are left feeling, well, alienated.
Which Carney defines as
a state of mind that can find a social order remote, incomprehensible, or fraudulent, beyond real hope or desire, inviting apathy, boredom, or even hostility.
Wow. That's the feeling of being a stranger in your own land.
That's the disease, he argues, particularly in working-class America today, and it goes hand in hand with the breakdown of other institutions, like the family. When community crumbles, the dream becomes a wasteland.
Part 3. The dissolution of key institutions. Okay, so if the decline of community is the root problem, we need to look at what's causing that decline. Carney highlights the weakening of key institutions. Let's start with marriage.
Yeah, the book points to this profound social change over the last couple of generations. The retreat from marriage, that traditional image of the married mom and dad household, it's just become much less common.
The numbers are pretty striking, aren't they?
They really are. In 1970, about 40% of all households were married parents with kids. By 2012, that dropped to just 20%.
Half.
Yeah, and the percentage of adults who are married overall, from 72% in 1960 down to just about 50% by 2016, it's a massive shift in how people structure their lives.
Now, the book talks about something called the Lena Dunham fallacy here. What's that about?
Right. It's Carney's term for what he sees as a common assumption, particularly among liberal elites. The idea that the decline in marriage is mainly driven by wealthy, educated women choosing liberation, choosing careers over marriage.
But the data doesn't support that view.
Not really. The numbers show the norm of marriage isn't collapsing among the elite. They still tend to get married and stay married at relatively high rates. It's collapsing among the working class.
How so?
Look at out-of-wedlock births. For women who didn't finish college, 58% of their babies are born outside of marriage. Compare that to just 13% for women who have at least some college education.
That's a huge gap.
It is, and it ties into research like the success sequence study from Brookings.
Well, yes, the sequence. Finish high school, get a job, get married before having kids.
Exactly. And the research shows that for young adults under 35 who follow all three steps, in that order, their poverty rate is only 3%. It's incredibly effective at avoiding poverty.
But that raises a big question, doesn't it? Is marriage a cause of wealth and stability, or is it a consequence? Do people get married because they're already stable?
The classic chicken or egg problem in sociology. The book definitely dives into that debate.
And it doesn't necessarily land definitively on one side?
No, it acknowledges the complexity. Some argue economic hardship and maybe a decline in marriageable men makes family formation harder for the working class. Fewer stable jobs, less economic security.
Makes sense.
But the reverse argument is also there. Maybe cultural shifts mean women feel less obligated to marry men who might be less reliable or stable.
Right. But regardless of which cause is which, the outcomes seem clear.
The outcomes are very clear. Children born to married parents just do better on average. Their poverty rate as adults is around 8%, compared to 27% for kids born to unmarried parents.
That's a massive difference.
Huge. They earn more, they work more hours, they're more likely to get married themselves. The data strongly suggests that intact families provide significant advantages, and crucially, strong communities make raising those families easier, providing that support structure we talked about.
So the decline of marriage and the decline of community are intertwined.
Deeply intertwined. Okay, so marriage is one pillar. What about work? We touched on jobs disappearing, but Carney argues the workplace itself as an institution has eroded.
Right. It's not just about the paycheck.
Exactly. Forces like the China effect, the rise of Chinese manufacturing and automation, they obviously killed a lot of traditional manufacturing jobs. We know that story.
Fewer people making more stuff, robots taking the new jobs.
Right. But Carney argues the deeper tragedy was the destruction of the community that those workplaces often provided.
How so? Give us an example.
Think about a place like Monessen, Pennsylvania, an old steel town. When the steel industry declined there, it wasn't just jobs that vanished. The population bled out. The social hub that the factory represented, it just dissolved. And research on local economies hit by import competition, like the work by Otter, Dorn, and Hansen, showed it wasn't just wages that suffered. People dropped out of the workforce entirely. They became, in the researchers' words, effectively unfit to work in their own hometowns.
Wow. Unfit to work.
Yeah. These were often non-college workers, less mobile. They couldn't just pick up and move easily, so they were stuck. The workplace, even a tough factory job, was often a primary place for networking, for camaraderie, for finding mentors, for that informal safety net.
Friends you see every day, people who notice if you're struggling.
Exactly. When those jobs leave, not only does the money dry up for local restaurants or churches, but that fundamental structure for social interaction just disappears.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because it connects to the modern economy too, doesn't it? The gig economy. How does getting your groceries delivered or driving for an app affect this community fabric? It seems convenient, sure, but is there a downside?
There's definitely a potential downside argued in the book. While gig work offers flexibility, which is appealing to many, it often lacks that reliability, regularity, and long-term duration of more traditional jobs. Carney argues those older jobs, even the seemingly mundane ones, cultivated certain virtues: showing up on time, delaying gratification, being reliable, skills that are pretty crucial for being, say, a stable family man or woman.
Like training grounds for life skills almost.
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
Low-skilled but reliable jobs acted as that. The gig economy, with its focus on flexibility and short-term contracts, often doesn't provide that same structure or implicit training. So it represents another way that the workplace as an institution of civil society is eroding.
Exactly. For many people, work was their most important connection to civil society outside the family. A place for friendship, mentorship, support. When work becomes purely transactional, you do the task, you get paid, end of interaction. It loses that capacity to build community, to bind people together.
Okay, so we've seen the erosion of family structures, the erosion of the workplace as a community hub. This leads Carney to what he calls America's indispensable institution, church. Especially, he argues, for the non-wealthy, for those outside the elite circles. It plays an absolutely central role in providing that social capital.
And there's data on this, too, beyond just anecdotes.
Oh, yeah. Gallup's well-being index, for instance, controlling for other factors like income, age, race, they found a clear correlation. Higher church attendance goes with greater happiness and well-being.
Interesting. What about people who are only moderately religious?
That's fascinating, actually. The study found that the moderately religious often fared worse on well-being measures than both the very religious and the completely non-religious.
Really? Why would that be?
The suggestion is maybe they feel some of the obligations or guilt without getting the full benefits of deep community involvement and strong belief. But the key point is the positive link between active religious participation and well-being.
And it fosters engagement beyond just church itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Robert Putnam's research in American Grace is cited. Regular churchgoers are more than twice as likely to volunteer for secular causes like schools or hospitals compared to people with similar demographics who rarely or never attend church.
So church acts like an engine for broader civic engagement.
A powerful engine. And again, the Lena Dunham fallacy sort of applies here too. The decline in religious affiliation. It's sharpest among the white working class, the very group Carney identifies as struggling most with alienation and community breakdown.
Let's look at some specific examples the book uses to show how these religious institutions function as community hubs.
Sure. The Mormon welfare system is a key example.
Bishop's Storehouse.
Right. It's like a grocery store, but there's no cash register. Needy families, assessed by their local lay leaders, their bishop, can go and get food and supplies. It's funded by members donating the money they'd normally spend on food during a monthly fast.
So it's very local, very relationship-based.
Exactly. It keeps charity and accountability closely tied together within the local ward structure. Or look at the Islamic Center of Greater Toledo.
That sounded like more than just a mosque.
Much more. It's explicitly designed as a community center. Weekly brunches, a weekend school, a food bank that serves halal food but is open to anyone in need, blood drives, volunteer opportunities. It's a hub.
As the president there said, just go to the mosque on Sunday, you'll meet everyone.
Yeah, it's the central gathering point. And similar dynamics exist in, say, tight-knit Orthodox Jewish communities like Kemp Mill in Maryland. The religious practice itself, needing to walk to synagogue on Shabbat, needing kosher businesses nearby, physically shapes the community and reinforces close ties.
So whether it's a church, mosque, synagogue, these local religious institutions provide this vital scaffolding.
Exactly. Scaffolding for families, safety nets in times of crisis, and crucial opportunities for people to serve others, which builds purpose and connection.
Carney really argues that for many Americans, there are basically two main ways into these vital networks of meaning and support. You're either part of the elite, with all its built-in network,
Or you go to church. And if you're not in either of those categories, the risk of falling into social isolation, into alienation, is much, much higher.
Part 4. Forces of alienation, over-centralization, and hyper-individualism. Okay, so we understand the importance of these local institutions. Now, what's actively breaking them down? Carney points to two big forces: over-centralization and hyper-individualism. Let's tackle over-centralization first, especially the idea that big government, even when trying to help, can hurt civil society. How does that work? This feels counterintuitive to some.
It can feel counterintuitive, yeah. The book brings up a quote from Barney Frank. Government is simply the name we give to the things we choose to do together.
Sounds reasonable on the surface.
Right. But Carney critiques it, saying that view kind of erases or ignores most of the things humans actually choose to do together, things that happen in families, churches, clubs, neighborhoods, outside of government structures.
So the danger is government crowding out those other things.
That's the argument. He cites research, for example, by economist Jonathan Gruber, who was actually involved in crafting the Affordable Care Act. Gruber studied the impact of the New Deal's expansion of federal welfare programs.
And what did he find?
He found that the role of churches as crucial providers of social services shrank dramatically as government spending expanded. The federal programs essentially took over functions that local, often faith-based, groups used to handle.
So, okay, the function gets taken over, but people are still getting help, right?
Yeah.
What's the loss, according to Carney?
That's the crux of the debate. Critics of this crowding out idea often say, well, are we supposed to provide suboptimal aid just to keep your church soup kitchen running? They might see the loss of those local institutions as just nostalgia.
Right. Efficiency versus community feeling.
But Carney argues the trade-off is much deeper than that. He says, the trade-off isn't that the poor all get fed at the cost of Aunt Gertrude losing some volunteer opportunities.
Okay.
The trade-off is that there is more money to ensure the poor get fed, and yet less social infrastructure around which the poor and working class can raise intact families, find meaningful work, and access the good life.
Ah, so it's not just about the material aid. It's about losing the relationships, the structure, the meaning that comes from those local interactions.
Precisely. Government can provide a crucial safety net, the book acknowledges that, but when it becomes too big, too centralized, too intrusive, it can inadvertently weaken or even crush the very civil society institutions that offer deeper forms of care, connection, and purpose.
And this centralizing force isn't just government, it's also big business, right?
Yeah.
How did industrialization and things like Taylorism change the nature of work?
Right. The Industrial Revolution obviously led to huge factories, big corporations, economic consolidation, and that spurred management theories like Frederick Winslow Taylor's scientific management or Taylorism,
Which treated workers
like cogs in a machine, essentially, breaking down tasks into simple, repetitive motions for maximum efficiency. It shifted the view of a worker from maybe an artisan or a member of a guild to an interchangeable part.
So work became less of an institution you belong to and more of a transaction.
Exactly. Relationships gave way to transactions, labor exchanged for payment. Now, this brought huge efficiency gains, cheaper goods, more overall wealth, but it came at the cost of that community aspect of work.
And this continues today with big chains replacing local businesses.
Yeah, that's part of it. The disappearance of what sociologist Ray Oldenburg called third places, those informal gathering spots, local pubs, coffee shops, general stores, barber shops, they get squeezed out by the efficiencies of large chains and big box stores.
Which are often less conducive to just hanging out and bumping into neighbors.
Right. And even urban planning contributes. Designing towns around cars, with huge distances between homes, work, and shopping, lots of strip malls. It makes those spontaneous community encounters much rarer. It isolates families. Carney even gives an example of a planned local brewpub bakery that couldn't get off the ground because of hundreds of thousands of dollars in regulatory costs.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, these forces, economic centralization, government regulation, they combine to create environments that are less human scale, less conducive to strong community bonds.
That's the argument. They prioritize efficiency or top-down control over local connection and autonomy.
Okay, let's pivot to the second major force, hyper-individualism. Carney suggests this is also eating away at civil society, driven by things like the I did build that mentality and the sexual revolution.
Yeah, American individualism is obviously a powerful force. It runs deep in the culture. You see it in the reaction to Obama's "you didn't build that" comment, or the enduring appeal of writers like Ayn Rand who champion the individual.
And Robert Putnam, the bowling alone guy, he observed this shift too.
He did. He talked about a giant swing toward the individualist pole in American culture, really taking off in the 1960s.
And this isn't just about freedom, it's a desire
To kind of mind your own business, keep to yourself, the ideal becomes being able to stream any movie, order any food, and never really have to interact with your neighbors if you don't want to. Relationships become more contingent, easily broken. Permanent commitments can feel like a burden on personal freedom.
which naturally leads to less participation in community groups, right? If the focus is purely on the self.
Exactly. Why join the PTA or the VFW if your primary goal is individual autonomy and minimal obligation?
And how did the sexual revolution specifically feed into this, eroding institutions like marriage?
Well, free love was part of the cultural moment, but the broader shift was towards sexual liberation, which had really lasting impacts on marriage as an institution. Things like no-fault divorce laws made marriage feel less permanent, more easily dissolvable. Norms around sex outside of marriage relaxed dramatically.
And the book argues this had tangible economic consequences, not just cultural ones.
Yes, citing research, interestingly, by former Fed chair Janet Yellen from back in her academic days.
Really? Janet Yellen?
Yeah. Her research looked at the decline of shotgun marriages, couples marrying because of an unintended pregnancy. As the cultural link between sex, marriage, and family weakened and contraception became widespread, though imperfectly used, out-of-wedlock births exploded, especially among the working class.
Leading to more single-parent households, more instability.
Right. Women, often taking cues from a culture that increasingly separated sex from long-term commitment and family, faced unintended pregnancies without the same social pressure or support structure to marry, contributing to cycles of poverty and social decay.
And how does the push for secularization fit into this picture of hyper-individualism?
Carney argues that a key thrust of modern secularism isn't just people losing faith, but an active effort to privatize religion. The message often boils down to believe what you want, but keep it to yourself.
Keep it out of the public square.
Exactly. The idea is that public life shouldn't be tainted by religious beliefs or institutions. This effectively tries to wall off churches, mosques, synagogues from playing an active role in civil society, from contributing to public discourse, or providing social services as religious institutions.
Turning faith into just a private individual
Right.
experience.
Which further isolates people and weakens the community building potential of these institutions.
So what does this all mean for community strength? It really does sound like a vicious cycle.
Hmm.
Individualism rises, institutions weaken, which makes people retreat further.
It certainly can be. And Carney points out this interesting paradox with elites.
The elite paradox.
Yeah. Often, the very people promoting these ideas of hyper-individualism, or maybe downplaying the importance of traditional institutions, they themselves tend to live in incredibly strong communities.
Right. You mentioned Chevy Chase. Their PTAs are probably packed, their libraries well-funded, maybe even their churches are full.
Exactly. They have the resources, economic and social, to essentially buy their way out of needing the kind of dense, close-knit support networks that poorer communities rely on more heavily. They can easily pay for childcare, access credit, buy insurance on the market.
Whereas in Newsburg, maybe you rely on your neighbor or your church community for those things.
Precisely. And Carney makes the provocative claim that the elites today often lack the courage to preach what they practice. Meaning, while their own kids might be implicitly or explicitly guided towards that success sequence, school, job, marriage, then kids, they might publicly promote alternative lifestyles or a kind of non-judgmental ecumenical niceness for society at large.
Viewing choices more as personal preferences than having moral weight.
Yeah, seeing them as best practices maybe, but not as moral norms. And that reluctance to affirm certain traditional structures, Carney argues, can inadvertently weaken the moral consensus that underpins strong communities, contributing to the alienation of those who lack the elite resources to navigate life without those structures.
Part 5. Overcoming alienation, small solutions with big impact. Okay, so if alienation is this local problem rooted in community breakdown and centralization is part of the cause, then big top-down government programs aren't likely to be the answer.
Right. As Carney puts it, no central solution can fix a problem caused in large part by centralization. It's logical, isn't it?
It is. So what is the path forward according to the book? It's not about bringing back the old factory jobs, is it?
No, he acknowledges that longing, but says protectionism won't bring those specific jobs back for people. Automation means robots are getting the new manufacturing jobs, even while output might be high.
So the focus needs to shift.
Needs to shift from the quantity of jobs to the quality of community. And the solutions he proposes are mostly about small solutions, about government and maybe big institutions getting out of the way to let local life flourish.
Okay, let's unpack some of these small solutions. How can we encourage civil society to grow organically?
Well, he touches on several areas. First, unions. Instead of just being collective bargaining agents, imagine unions also acting as worker support systems, providing training, maybe mutual insurance, acting like guilds or mutual aid societies, becoming real institutions again.
Interesting. What about public schools?
He argues many are effectively government schools, controlled by distant state or county boards. The solution: empower local communities to have real control over curriculum, mission, hiring. Let them become genuine community hubs again, not just buildings run by bureaucrats. A real village needs active involvement from the villagers.
Makes sense. More local control. What else?
Third, religious liberty. He argues for ending what he sees as assaults that try to push religion entirely into the private sphere. Allowing religious groups to operate openly in civic life, running charities, schools, hospitals, expressing their values publicly is vital for a healthy civil society.
Like the examples of the Islamic Center or the Mormon welfare system.
Exactly. Fourth, safety net reform. Think about it through the lens of subsidiarity.
Subsidiarity.
Meaning the principle that problems should be solved at the lowest, most immediate level possible. So instead of massive, centralized welfare programs being the default, maybe government acts more like a backstop, a safety net for the safety nets. Let local charities, churches, nonprofits be the first line of response, with government providing auxiliary support or reinsurance.
Keeping help closer to the ground, more relational.
Right. And fifth, urban planning. Local and state governments have a role here. Encourage walkable towns, mixed-use development where homes and shops are closer together, foster those third places, move away from car-centric sprawl that isolates people. Carney even critiques his own suburban neighborhood for being designed for cars, not spontaneous human interaction.
And even the tax code plays a role.
Potentially, yeah. He questions things like the mortgage interest deduction. Does it just incentivize people to buy bigger, more expensive houses further apart? Does that hinder families from clustering near relatives or community hubs, making housing less affordable? It's about re-examining policies to see if they inadvertently weaken community bonds.
So it's a whole range of small nudges, policy adjustments aimed at removing barriers and allowing local life, local institutions to breathe and grow.
Exactly. Getting government and maybe giant corporations out of the way so individuals and families can do the work of building community themselves.
Which brings us back to the power of those institutions and the vision for the future.
Yeah, the book really circles back to the idea that civil society, these local connections, is where we find purpose, support, and where we develop virtue through interaction.
And the vision isn't necessarily about creating brand new things.
Not always. It's often about invigorating what's already there. Imagine churches or libraries or community centers providing things like daily community meals like the Islamic Center's food bank model expanded, or fostering regular, simple gatherings like the Friday night on the field event at a parish he mentions, where families just hang out.
Simple ways to build connection.
Very simple. Carney says, look, even in the most abandoned parts of America, there still stands a church, and it's still open one day a week. The vision is just about making these existing potential hubs more active, more central to daily life again, operative every day.
Bringing back that local vibrancy. He acknowledges strong communities can sometimes feel suffocating, right?
He does. Shared norms can feel restrictive, but he argues America's inherent individualism and the variety of different local groups provide a natural check on that, allowing for both shared purpose and individual liberty.
But ultimately, these policy changes, these nudges, they can only create the space. They can't force community to happen.
No, the book is clear on that. At the end of the day, only individuals and families coming together can do that. It requires personal commitment, personal action.
Which really raises that final important question for all of us, doesn't it? What does it mean for us as individuals living our lives to actually seek the well-being of the city where we live? Not just our own success, our own flourishing, but the health of the whole community.
It echoes that quote from Jeremiah that Carney uses as an epigraph. Seek the well-being of the city. Pray to the Lord for it, for in its well-being will be your well-being. It's a powerful call to be invested locally, recognizing our fates are tied together.
And that seems like a fitting place to wrap up our book talk on Alienated America by Timothy P. Carney. The core message is pretty clear, isn't it? The decline of the American dream, that feeling of alienation, it's not just about money. It's deeply rooted in the erosion of local community, the weakening of civil society.
Driven by these big forces over centralization, hyper-individualism. But the hopeful part is that the solutions aren't necessarily huge federal programs. They're closer to home, re-engaging with local institutions, rebuilding that social capital, right where we are.
It really is a powerful call to action, and it goes beyond just policy debates. It makes you think. Maybe the best way to measure how we're doing isn't just the national GDP or abstract individual rights,
but the health, the vitality of those little platoons, as Edmund Burke called them, the communities right outside our front doors.
So the final thought for you, our listener, is this. What step can you take starting today to cultivate that sense of belonging, that connection, that purpose in your own neighborhood, your own town?
Something we can all think about.
Absolutely. And please don't miss out on more conversations like this one. Join our community of curious learners. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel for more in-depth discussions and more book talks exploring the hidden dynamics shaping our world.
Thanks for tuning in.